Good morning. I'm Kim Shockley, and I'm here representing the GROW team for the annual conference. We're talking with two of our pastors this morning, Mindy Goknauer from Emmanuel United Methodist Church in Enola, and Jay Jones, who's from the Trucksville Church in the Scranton-Wilkesboro district. And we're here to talk about what is a culture of call and what does the Bible tell us about God's call on our lives. So Jay, you've explored what the Bible tells us about God's call on our lives. What would you say are the highlights that we need to remember?
Well, certainly, as I've read and studied over the years some of the call stories in Scripture, one of the things that always has impressed me is they follow a very similar pattern. First of all, it seems as if God's call comes to some of the most unlikely of characters. You think about the young peasant woman, Mary. Think about a tax collector, fisherman, and even some of the most flawed characters in Scripture. I think about Moses, and I think about David, and certainly it brings confidence to any of us being called by God. Secondly, it seems as if God's call always comes as an interruption to the status quo of someone's life. And generally, the people are called out of their comfort and out of their security into uncertainty and into an uncertain future. And maybe that's why most of the initial responses to God's call have a hesitancy associated with it as well. It seems as if most of those who are called begin by coming up with the reasons why someone else should be called or why they can't fulfill what's been asked of them. But then the final part of that general pattern of the call stories in Scripture is God's reassurance. God's reassuring each of these individuals that God would be with them each and every step of the way.
Thank you, Jay. Mindy, do you have a favorite scriptural call story?
I think that my favorite call story is probably Moses's story. And I love that story so much because I think it's really relatable. Most people aren't like jumping up and down, ready to go, volunteering to go wherever God is calling them, wherever that might be. And so I think that, the excuses and like, God, please send somebody else. You can't want me. I think that's really relatable. It's Abraham's story really resonates more with me of that, like, yes, God, I'll go, but then like have some hesitations later. That's more my story. But I think like for generally the story of Moses hits home for a lot of folks.
Thank you. So Mindy, you've been doing some work with folks over the last 2 years since I've been here to help understand what a culture of call is in today's world. Can you say a few things about that process and what you've learned?
Yeah, so this project started as a kind of commission from Wesley Theological Seminary. And with Kathy Kind, we've been working through kind of defining together and creating a culture here in Susquehanna Conference of a call. And so it's been wonderful. I've had so many different connections with people all across the United States talking about how they're creating a culture of call in their own churches and in their own communities. And it's been fun to collaborate and really work together, which is what the church is all about. So it's been really exciting for me to be a part of this adventure.
How did we define call?
Yeah, so I had a team that has been working on this definition, and we've been kind of collaborating and praying together over what does that look like. And so what we landed on as culture of call is about creating an environment where both young and old alike are listening for God's voice and responding in bold and meaningful ways.
Thank you. That's a very relatable statement. Jay, do you have anything else to add to this whole conversation about culture of call?
First of all, I would say that Mindy is one of the products of a culture of the call, certainly in her own congregation and really in the annual conference. I'm old enough and have been involved in enough years just to see the results of some of the fruits of our labor earlier in our time period when we did some God's Call events with both the young adults and the youth. And Mindy's one of the products of that. Thanks be to God. And I would also say that the community, the church, is such a vital part of all of that. And so part of that definition of the culture of the call, has to include a congregation that just embraces its role of support and encouragement each and every step of the way. And just a reassurance that indeed God is calling those individuals, and see where God may lead them.
Well, to wrap it up, let's ask a question. How is your congregation living out a culture of call that's about creating an environment where both young and old alike are listening for God's voice and responding in bold and meaningful ways? Thank you for listening today.